Welcome back. This week we're going to be talking about grammar. Now, don't be frightened. Don't run screaming from the room. Grammar is not really as difficult as you might now imagine it to be. Grammar, in the end, makes sense. Now, that I've said that, let me sort of back up from it. Okay? Because when we're dealing with English grammar does not make as much sense as other grammars. One of the problems that we have with trying to understand and explain English grammar is that we use terms that really work better for Latin than they do for English. Latin functions differently than does English. But these are the traditional terms. These are the terms that you will find in the dictionary. These are the terms you'll find in most handbooks. Just rest assured that scholars and linguists are always looking for other ways of describing what it is we do when we construct sentences. Now, the best news is that there are rules for combining words into phrases and combining phrases into sentences. But you know already most of those rules. It's tacit knowledge. It's knowledge that you have acquired just from learning to speak the language. Okay, you know what words to place where in order to make a sentence that makes sense to you and to whoever you're addressing. So, most of this stuff is already inside of you. So all we're doing right now is trying to help you dig down into what you know and be able to take it out and articulate it and think about it so that you can explain to fellow students. Now first, let me talk about subject phrases versus verb phrases. Now with subject phrases, all we're talking about is in a sentence something that does something. The words connected to the subject of the sentence. Such a sentence like, John hit the ball. John is the subject. So, tall John hit the ball. Tall describes John, so tall John is the subject phrase. Hit the ball is what we call the verb phrase. Okay, so it's the verb plus everything that comes or associates with it. Hit the ball swiftly. Okay? So at phrases and verb phrases. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk about parts of speech here. So what I want to look at is the lexical definitions versus the functions. And the difficulty here is that, when we look at the lexical definitions, the dictionary definitions of these words, that gives us one thing. But when we see how the words function in a sentence, that gives us something else. And you need to know that function trumps definition. It's how the word functions in a sentence that really matters. So what you need to learn here is the structure of the sentences to see how words function. So verbs are always words that do something, or verbs are words that are something. Okay, they just denote a relationship. And once you know that, I think you've got most of the problems down. There are various types of nouns and noun substitutes. So noun can be thought of as person, place, or thing. That's the traditional definition of it. That is insufficient. Okay? Because a noun is actually a function within a sentence group. So the noun is the thing that acts, whatever that thing is. It may be an idea. An idea can be a noun. Actually, there's a form of verb that can be a noun because we're talking about the function itself, the action itself. Okay, now those are the basic building blocks, the basic spine of a sentence is obviously the verb and the noun. Verbs function in a number of different ways. Okay, verbs are always an action, something's doing something. Okay, a verb is swimming, is skiing. Okay, I am skiing, I am swimming, okay, am swimming, am skiing, those are the verbs. But those same verb forms can function as nouns. So if I say skiing is fun, swimming is good exercise, in these sentences, swimming and skiing are the nouns. So you see, noun is more function than it is a particular word. So always be careful. When you look at a dictionary, it'll list how the word functions in various ways, and the meaning of the word will change depending on how it functions. It'll list verb, it'll list noun, if it can function as a noun. So that's something you need to know. Other than nouns and verbs, we have words that primarily modify things. Okay, so they change the meaning of. So adjectives and adverbs are primary modifiers. They change the meaning of something. So an adjective such as tall, tall girl, modified tall is the adjective that modifies girl. Okay, spoke or speak slowly. I think the girl spoke slowly or the girl speaks slowly. Slowly modifies speaking, modifies the verbs. That's what we call an adverb. We have different phrases. I give you a prepositional phrase before. There are different types of phrases. We've had noun phrases and verb phrases, but there are also participial phrases and infinitive phrases. These are things that we'll be talking about again. So I'm just giving you an overview now. We'll get back to all this stuff. Dependent clauses. I told you about independent and dependent clauses. Dependent clauses usually function, as I said, adverbially or adjectivally. Let me give you an example of an adverbial function for a dependent clause. When it is raining, we stay inside. Okay, we stay inside is the main sentence. That's the independent clause. When it is raining tells on or under what condition we stay inside. So that is the dependent clause. Now let me give you an adjectival dependent clause. The boy who won the contest is related to me. Okay, the boy who won the contest. Who won the contest? Has a subject and verb relationship, but it modifies the boy. Okay? So that is a dependent clause functioning as an adjective. When we talk about verbs, we already mentioned this a little bit. Okay, we're talking about the whole issue of agreement. A verb has to agree with its preceding noun in a sentence. So if I say, let's say, I am speaking, great, or I speak, okay, that's agreeing. But if we were a number of us in this room, more than just me, and we were speaking, okay, so we are speaking, okay, is different. Okay, I spoke, sometimes we spoke, sometimes he speaks, or he spoke. It depends on the tense that we're using and the number in the relationship. For example, I am, she is, we are. See, the change there depends on that number, that relationship. Okay, there's a person relationship too, and that's the difference between I, you, and he or she. Okay, the tense, we've talked about that. Voice. There's also sometimes a gender that is involved with certain words. They change. There are not many words that do this. They change depending on whether it's referring to male or a female. Okay, we've gotten away from this in English a little bit, but it's certainly true in other languages where the form of the word changes on the gender. Let me go on then to prescriptive versus descriptive grammar. Mostly you are afraid because you encountered prescriptive grammar. Prescriptive grammar is that grammar which says these are the rules, you better follow them. Now, prescriptive grammar is useful because these are the societal conventions that we've adopted over time. But it is not the most important way of looking at or examining grammar. We also have descriptive grammar, which is actually more interesting and more fluid than prescriptive grammar. Descriptive grammar just examines what works and asks why. Because really when it gets down to it, all we're trying to do is get some meaning from one person across to the next person. We're trying to reach consensus about what that meaning is. And any way we can do it sometimes can be effective. And if it's effective, then that's what we're going for. Now, what you know is that these things matter because the way you are perceived often depends on the way you talk. So if you speak one way, you will be perceived a certain way. If you speak correctly, you will be perceived a certain way. If you speak incorrectly, you will be perceived a certain way. Also, different audiences, different times, different social situations call for a sort of varying in the way you present yourself. for example, I'm trying right now to be not completely formal, but not completely informal. Okay. Now, were you sitting in my office right beside me and we were talking about this, I'd be joking, I'd be being much less formal than I am right now, and I'd be speaking differently. Okay, that's the idea of a register. There are certain ways of speaking in certain situations, and this is okay. You should have a register where you can speak informally to your friends. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? But you also should be able to speak more effectively in more formal situations. That's what we're trying to help you do, and that's what we're trying to help you recognize, and that's where we're building. Okay. We have different ways of looking at how structure works in sentences. I have a principle called constituent analysis. And that's part of descriptive grammar, which looks at how words fit together in phrases and sentences, in phrases really functioning within a sentence. When these words fit together, there are certain rules that they seem to follow that we can't quite articulate, but they seem to follow. For example, okay, we can say the tall, good-looking girl. Okay, or we could also say the good-looking tall girl. Okay, but we can't say the tall, looking good girl. Okay? It doesn't sound quite right. Okay? That's again constituent analysis. Why certain words can be in certain orders. Your text spends much more time on this than I am going to. Okay, finally today, what we've talked about is we've been looking at grammar. We've been looking at parts of speech. We've looked at phrases, we've looked at clauses. One thing I didn't cover and we need to talk about is types of sentences. Sentences can be described as being determined by how they function. So there's declarative, that's just a sentence that makes a statement. There's interrogative, a sentence that asks a question. There's imperative, a sentence that makes a command. And exclamatory, a sentence that just says, wow, what a day. Okay? So those are the types of sentences according to how they function. We've also talked a little bit about forms of sentences, the simple versus the compound versus the complex. Okay, a simple sentence is just a straight subject-verb relationship. A compound sentence is two or more subject-verb relationships joined together. And a complex sentence is a subject-verb relationship joined to a dependent subject-verb relationship. Okay, we'll be coming back to this territory again. If you haven't figured out everything I've been talking about in the last 10 minutes or so, we will explore this entire territory anew once we get back next week or the week after. Take care.